Hi. Carmel Doll Shop team, Michael Canadas and the sewing experts have come up with this really wonderful full slip and pantallettes for Eugénie, the reproduction Dehors doll that they are the exclusive purveyors of. And it's really kind of a wonderful, very simple set to make. You have the bloomers, which are just, again, very simple with a drawstring waist. And you have the full slip. And by full slip, we mean that it does not have a chemise. It has a built-in sort of bodice, under bodice. And it just creates a very nice silhouette for her dresses. And her dresses really are of probably the mid 1860s to the late 1860s, early 70s. And you'll see something here in the sort of the evolution of fashion, which I think is really interesting that they've accommodated. This is no longer a completely round skirt. The fullness is really being sort of concentrated towards the back. And the reason for that is that the crinoline is now starting to collapse a little bit. It's not, as I said, not completely round. Designers like Worth were starting to use the crinoline less and less. And they were basically, sometimes I think they would have something called a crinolette, which was a sort of flatter and a little fuller in the back to support these skirts. But you can see that the fullness is really concentrated back here. And she actually has a very sort of flat, ungathered portion of the waist. And I can show you here in this book from 1868, which is about maybe 2 years later, how that skirt is starting to now deflate a little bit and that fullness is becoming concentrated towards the back, and generally there would be a train as well. So you can see that in historical prints and archives, but going back to the garment, it's again very simple, and the directions will give you two options. One where you can top stitch and finish all of this by machine. I think if you can see the stitching here and the stitching around the waistline at the bottom of the hem. I like top stitching. This will allow you to zip through this. I mean, it will not take you very long to do this. But I like to do hand finishing. I use the machine for the, actually I didn't think I used the machine for the bottom. I did the bottom lace application by hand. So the only thing I used the machine on for here was just all of our seams, but I did the hems and I did the neck binding and the armhole binding by hand with a slip stitch. I just happen to like that look. Also, there are going to be snaps that are going to be provided to you in this kit. And I think the snaps are wonderful. They create a very flat, a flat profile, so you don't have the sort of the bumps from hooks and eyes. I wanted to try something a little different, so I did a button and a thread loop as a closure. So excited to have you make these. The fabric is really beautiful. It's a printed cotton that has this gorgeous all over floral pattern on it. Really very delicate and feminine. So have fun with this. She's going to have a series of day dresses that she'll be wearing with this. Her large ball gowns, which were the first series of dresses that were made for her. The crinoline is not made to go under this. It's much, much too big. But this will give you this beautiful support for those day gowns that will be coming out soon. So have fun with this. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks. We're going to start with pantallettes. It's very, very simple. You basically have one pattern piece and you're going to cut a waistband about 12 inches by 1 inch on the straight for the waistband piece. One thing I want to say about this fabric, it's really beautiful. It's got a sort of a printed white overall pattern to it of these little flowers. It's really delicate and beautiful. You can use either side that you want. One side's going to be a little bit brighter and one side's going to be a little bit duller. I like the duller a little bit better for some reason. I don't know, maybe it's just a little bit more subtle. But I like that, so that's what I'm using, but you can do whatever you want. So you're going to be cutting 2 mirrored sets, and I've already done a little bit of work ahead of this just to show you some of the steps here. So what you're going to do is on the back, and the back is this higher point. If you can see here, front is lower, there's a slope here. So this is your back. You're going to turn in a very small amount, I mean, like 1/8 of an inch, and you're going to iron that down along that curved back. And then you're going to turn it over again, and you don't really even necessarily need to pin it. You could just basically work with this with your hands, without pins, or you can pin it. Now, the instructions say that you can use a machine or you can use hand sewing for this, and there'll probably be a combination of both. But in the sample here, you can see that it's done with machine stitching, and I just want to show you what that looks like. So the back has been turned over, and then it's just been top stitched, and that's been top stitched on both sides here. So you're basically running a top stitch along this edge. I kind of like, as you probably know, I do like the machine. Very long stitches, I'll probably use it for the full slip. But for this, I like the look of just a simple hem. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn this over twice, make a very narrow hem. I've slip stitched this down, but again, you can top stitch it. And then you're going to turn up about 1/8 of an inch on the leg opening, the bottom of the leg. And then I believe this is a 3/4 inch turn. So that's 1/8 and 3/4. And you can mark that with a friction if you want it to be exactly perfect. And then you're going to iron that down. After I ironed it down, I actually just hemmed it with a slip stitch. But again, this will make it really fast. You can use a machine to do a top stitch. Both would have been used at this time because the sewing machine was being used in the mid-1860s and made everyone's lives so much easier. So then what we're going to do is we're going to apply a piece of lace flat to the bottom of this. Now, you can do this in one of two ways. And I think when you get to the petticoat, you are going to want to do machine stitching because it's going to just be too much. But you could either just have the header overlap a little bit. And this one you definitely want to pin because it's going to be, and if you see little threads or anything, you'll just trim those off. This one, I think, if you are going to be doing this by machine, you're going to want to pin it in place because it's going to jump all over the place if you don't pin it. So that's one way of doing it. You're going to basically pin it in place on straight, and then you're going to top stitch it very close to the edge of that hem. So I would say probably like a 1/16 away from the hemmed edge. Or you can do it, and again, there's no need for you to do this. It's just sort of the way that I like to attach lace, and I'm not going to be doing the same thing on the slip because it would take forever. Well, maybe I will. Who knows? Let's see how much patience I have, because I do want to show this to you and make good time with it. So you can either, again, stitch it flat on, or you can whip it on. And by whipping, you're just going to, and I can trim that thread later, you're just going to catch a little bit of the hem, and you're going to catch a little bit of the lace at the same time. And you're just going to keep doing that across. I'll do it a couple of times and just show you what that's going to look like. I think that in the 19th century, they generally did whip lace trim onto undergarments and onto lingerie and things like that. And maybe they had other techniques they did. I'm just going to do a little bit of this and show you what that looks like. Okay, I just did a little bit. Take a pin out. You can see when you iron this or press it, let's take that out too. When you press it, it gives us sort of like very sort of pretty finish here. It's very flat. You don't really see the stitching. I love that. I love seeing that in existing garments, and I love doing that as much as I possibly can when I'm sewing lace on. So I'm going to finish this. I'll finish this one as well, and come back and I'll show you the next step, which is going to be very simple, because you are then going to be joining these at the front. And you're going to be doing that with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you're going to be either overcasting it, but in this case you can probably just pink that edge, because you're going to, this is not, again, going to be laundered. It's just for your doll to wear underneath her day dresses or her evening gowns. And you don't really have to. If you want to, if you know, no French seams here. If you just want to overcast these raw edges before you sew them together, that's another way of doing it, if you don't want to use the pinking shears. So I'm going to come back when I've done a couple of steps, and I will show you when those pieces have been put together. So I've done a couple of things here. We've put the front together, right sides together, the front seam. We've sewn that. In this case, I've pinked it. I did a little clip on the curve, and then I pressed it open. And then with our leg seams aligned and our lace aligned, we've basically pinned and closed up this inside seam. So very, very simple. There's not much to it. But I think, the machine definitely does help. I use the machine for the inside seams. I use the machine for the front seam. You might have a little overlap there. That's fine. I think what I'm going to do, I'm not going to press this open. I'm just going to press the seam just to make it a little bit sharper, and make sure that the lace sort of comes out. I'll do that on the other side. I didn't do a very good job there. There we go. Yeah. And one thing I kind of like to do with my pantalettes, and I don't know about you, sounds like I'm wearing them, but when I make them, what I like to do is I just like to press the sides too. I guess I really overpress a lot of things, but I like when something feels like it's kind of like flat and it's been taken out of a trunk and it's been starched or something. Okay, so this is your front, and I'm gonna do a little better job ironing that. This is your front. This is your back opening. So now what you're going to do is you're going to find the center of your waistband, and I think I said that would be like 12 by 1, which this is. And you're going to find the center of your waistband, and you're going to find the center front, and you're going to pin the 2 raw edges together all the way across. And you're going to have some hanging over, which is perfectly fine. You do want some of that hanging over. I'm not going to go through all of this. Okay. So basically what you're making is a drawstring channel. I think this is, you see a lot of drawstrings in 19th century doll clothing, because it really helped to adjust the waist. And you see it in real garments too. They use drawstrings for necklines and for other areas where they want to adjust fit. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sewing this together. It's right sides together, 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're going to trim that. We're going to iron that up we're going to turn in the seam allowance here, and we're gonna fold it open, rather fold it over, and basically you're just going to have this little channel at the top. So what I do want to show you is I'm going to do this in I'm going to show you the way that Leo, who's brilliant at sewing, has done this, because it's a much easier way than I'm going to show you. Is that basically what he did is he attached this, he pinked the other raw long edge, he sewed it on, he flipped it over, but rather than turning it under here, he's just basically pinned it and then top stitched it a little bit above the seam line here. Do you see that top stitching? So you don't have to actually have to fold this in and slip stitch it to the inside of the seam, which is what, I like to do that. One thing I didn't say is that when you do fold it in, you're going to be folding in this additional piece of fabric. It should be like 1/4 or 3/16 of an inch. So when you turn it over, you're going to have that folded finished edge. Now, you don't want to sew that edge, this opening closed, because that's where we're going to put our drawstring. So I'm going to go off and I'm going to sew the waistband closed, and then we're going to fit it to my Eugénie and see how it looks. The pantalettes are done. You could see that we've done this waistband, or the little channel at the top, and using a blunt large eye needle, we've threaded the string or the cord through here. We've left about 5 inches when the pantalettes are open on either side. Let me see if I can just find the sample just to show you what that looks like when it's not gathered up. Again, I've done the waistband a slightly different way than the sample, but either way is perfectly fine. I did mine by hand. The sample was done with a machine top stitch. The waistband's not actually turned under and slip stitched. It's basically just pinked on the raw edge, pinned, and then it's top stitched very close to the waistband seam. So, it's a very, very smart way of doing it. It's definitely a time saver. Again, they would have had the sewing machine. They probably would have done something like this in the 19th century. I just prefer, again, the look of the hand sewing. But this could be entirely, we use the machine for the front seam and for the inside leg seam. This could be done that way, and it would be really, really fast to make. So we're going to go now to the full slip, and this is really a nice design that Carmel team has come up with. It's comprised of 1 bodice front and 2 bodice backs. And what we've done is we've cut a mirror of this backing, or this back piece, because you're going to need to have 2 reverse or mirrored pieces. And then we've actually also cut the skirt out. And I don't think this is going to fit in the camera because it's just such a big pattern. But if you can see here, this is a very large skirt piece. You're going to assemble it. You're going to see that there's some letters on the pattern pieces. You just join them together. I have a little bit of overlap here. It doesn't matter, but you just want to make sure that it's as carefully joined as possible. And then I've cut it out, and I've cut my piece from that. One thing I would just want to point out here is there are some markings here. You do want to cut this on the fold. This is the center front of the slip. There's a mark here, and there is a mark here. When we get to that, we're going to be gathering all of that fabric up. So it's going to be very full in the back, and I'll show you the sample in a little bit. And then there's also a mark here. You're going to be leaving this open from this point to this point. So there's the skirt back opening. So that's that's the large piece you're going to be putting together. And then I'm going to show you the sample, and hopefully it will fit. And you'll see how that very, very long, well, I wouldn't say maybe it's very long, but very full in the back. At this period, dresses were becoming more oval. Towards the end of the 1860s, that would all sort of like collapse and there would be a train. But at this point, it was all about intentionally focusing the fullness towards the back. And you'll see here that the front, there is a section, and that's what the markings were for, that is not gathered. So you have this very beautiful, like flat front, and then all this fullness and a slight, train in the back, and that's really going to help to create the silhouette. This shows you the front of the bodice, the slip bodice, and this shows you the back. And what we're going to do first is we're going to turn under. Let me just make sure I'm getting my dimensions exactly right for you. About, I would say 3/16 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch. We're going to turn the raw edge of this back in and press it. And then we're going to fold it over again and turn it in. I think it's another 3/8 of an inch. Yeah, 3/8 of an inch. And then again, you can slip stitch this. Or really a wonderful time saver is you could top stitch it and just stitch it down in one sort of piece. So you want to do that. Then you actually want to also, with right sides together, remember we have like two sides to this fabric. I'm using the duller side, but you can always use the brighter side. You're going to sew the shoulder seams together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you're going to pink that or overcast it and then press that seam open. You're not going to close your side seams yet because we need to bind the these arms, eyes, and the collar, or the neckline of the slip. They all need to be bound. So this is really just one single piece of fabric, one layer of fabric, and it has this binding, so you have this nice, clean, finished edge with no fraying. That's the first thing we're going to be doing. So I'm going to go away. I'm going to sew the shoulder seams. I'm going to slip stitch, but again, you can top stitch, excuse me. And then I'll come back and I'll show you the next step, which will be to apply the binding to the neckline and to the sleeve openings. You can see a light streaming in the morning here. Even with shades, it's very bright in this sewing room. So hopefully that's not too distracting for you. So the last thing we had done was we had sewn the shoulder seams together and we pink them and press them open. And then this is going to really be an identical process for everything here. You're going to be cutting a piece of about 3/4 inch bias strip. You're going to be applying it to the right sides to right sides, aligning the raw edge to the top raw edge of the neckline. You're going to be sewing it. You're going to be turning it in on the short ends, turning it in on the long edge, and you're going to be sewing that in place. Now, I had done this with like an inch bias, and I thought, this feels too big to me. So I've changed it to a 3/4 inch, and that's the size you can see here. I think it's just a little bit more delicate. I am slip stitching this, but again, as I've said before, if you really want if you want this project to really be fast and also really be beautifully finished, you can top stitch it in place, which is shown on the sample here. So you're going to do that on the neckline. You're going to do that on each of the arms, eyes, and I'm just basically slip stitching this. I don't need to show you all of that, but again, you can top stitch it. I just like the I like the look of the slip stitch because I feel like it's just my preference, and you can do whatever you want. You certainly will save a lot of time if you do it by machine. So once you've done that, I'm just going to stop that. You're going to be just carefully ironing everything, making sure that it's nice and smooth. So you have a nice smooth, you have a little bit, I'm going to have to use a little mist on that to get that out. Then right sides together, once that's all sewn up, you see how the bias extends past the side seam? You're going to be enclosing that bias, and you're going to be sewing that together, and then you're going to be either overcasting or, oh my goodness, my brain, this thing. You're going to be trimming the seam, and you're going to be pressing it open. You're going to do that on both sides. And then you can basically set this aside because you're pretty much done with the bodice piece. Now, I showed you the pattern, how big that pattern is, and I'm going to show you, this is cut on a fold. So this is, it's a very, very wide piece of fabric you're going to be working with. So the first thing that you're going to want to do here, and I think I had mentioned this, is you're going to want to transfer some of your markings to the pattern. So the first one I'm going to transfer is this. You only have to do that on one side. I'm using a friction, and I'm going to transfer the front. We'll just make sure we get our front right. I need a much larger work surface for these videos. Let's see here. Okay, so that's your front. And you're just going to flip that, and you're going to do the same thing on the other side. Well, you probably only need to do the front marking and the back marking. This you only need to do once because that's going to be seamed together. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to turn up about approximately 1/4 of an inch on the bottom all the way across, and you're going to press that in. And I'm not going to do the entire thing because it would just take too long. And then you're going to press that in another inch. So again, if you really want to make it, and this is all wrinkled, obviously you're going to do a very nice ironing job before, and you're going to iron all the way through each step. You're just going to do, sometimes, you can mark this all the way across if you want. Sometimes I just do a few marks and then I just eyeball it. But this is a nice deep hem, and this is actually going to provide some stiffness or shape to the bottom of the slip, which is nice because these probably would have had a hoop under them or something like that, but they would have supported a lot of fabric. So once you've done that, you're going to be hemming this. And again, I'll say it again and again. You could just do a top stitch. This is really beautiful. Or you could do a slip stitch. And I think I'm probably going to do a slip stitch. Once you've got that done, you're going to take, maybe I should have started at the other end, but I can show you here. Yeah, let's see. I'll do it like this. You're going to take your lace, maybe want to extend it a little bit on one side. I am not going to whip this on because I think that would be really, really time consuming. But I might hand stitch it on. What you're going to be basically doing is you're going to be taking your lace flat. You're going to create a tiny little tuck. It's like 1/8 of an inch tuck. It's just to create a tiny little bit of fullness there and to pull the lace up. And you're going to do that maybe about every 1.5 inches. I'm not measuring, but you don't need to measure. It's just, you just need to eyeball it. And, you want to make sure you should have more than enough lace to do this all the way across the bottom. And, maybe it might actually be better to do this where you actually are just going to work with the lace while it's flat. And because it's a little bit tricky to do a little tuck on lace when it's being pinned to another piece of fabric, it might just be easier to do your little tucks. And you know, in this way, if you, let's say you get to the end of your lace and you figure out you've got a little bit too much or a little bit too little, you can adjust it while you still have the pins in it, you know. And again, if you want to measure it, you can measure it. If you just want to eyeball it, you can eyeball it. So you can see that's sort of like approximate. So then what we're going to do, where's my hemmed edge? Where's the hemmed edge? Okay, here we go. Once this is all hemmed down, you're then going to apply your lace to the edge, and you're just going to sew it right to the edge, and you're going to make sure you're capturing those little tucks. You're going to do that, well, this looks like it already fell out, but you're going to do that all the way across until you reach the end. And then you're going to the right sides together. You might want to, you know, I can see through the material here. You're going to enclose the hem and the lace in the back seam. You're going to sew from the bottom, including the lace, all the way to the top, and you're going to stop at that mark, which I think is about 3.5 inches from the top edge. And you're going to either pink that or overcast it. You're going to press it open, but here you're going to do a very narrow hem. And again, you can do that by not rolling it, but doing a very narrow hem, or you could just pink it, turn it over, and top stitch it. Here, it hasn't been top stitched, that's fine too. You can just, as long as it's a nice clean press. And then what we're going to do, and I can actually, now that I've got this together, I'm just going to show you, this should be about, yeah, 1 inch. We're going to make our markings on both sides. And this is where we're going to start our gathers. And these are going to be machine gathers. You're going to want to make sure that you do them within 1/4 inch, which is your seam allowance, because you don't want them to show when you seam the bodice. So I would probably start here and here. It's going to be pretty tight. You know, if you don't feel comfortable sewing that close, you might be able to even just like do a 3/16, start your stitching at 1/4. I think that's probably fine. And then you just have a 3/16 inch seam there. So those are the steps we're going to go through. When I come back, I'm going to show you how we attach the slip skirt to the bodice. So we've sewn up the back. We had applied our lace. Again, I did this by hand. I pre-pleated it to make it easier to work with, and then I just sewed it in place with a slip stitch. But this will be a much faster way of doing it if you just top stitch your hem and top stitch the lace in place. And then I gave it a little bit of a press, not all the way down to the bottom, because you want to keep a little bit of that fullness there. And I'm probably going to take this down and give it a good steam. I did then, and you could see here that we've closed up the side seams, pinked them, and our arm size have been bound. The neckline's been bound. We've pinked them, the side seams, and we've pressed them open. And then what we did was we ran two rows of gathering stitches. You know, you might want to go a little bit larger because I think you're going to be pulling a lot of fabric into this small space. But starting 1 inch from the center, we started to sew, and then we stopped approximately an inch or 3/4 of an inch from the back. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to pull up those gathers. You don't have to really, sorry. I'm going to find the center of our fabric, which we have here. And I think I'm going to move this over just a little bit. And I'm going to pull up those gathering stitches. Again, I used, maybe this is like 3.5, maybe I would go with like a four stitch length, just to make sure that you're able to pull all of this into that small space, because it's a lot. It's a lot of fabric. And you're basically not pulling the thread, you're guiding your gathers over the thread because you don't want anything to break. You're going to want it to be really pretty tight. Like, I don't want there to be any extra here. So then what we're going to do is we're going to match find our center of the skirt, match it with the center of the bodice. Pull those. And then what you're really going to be doing is you're going to be finding your back opening of the skirt and the back opening of the bodice, and you're going to align those and pin them. And then this is what I'm saying about all of this fullness. And I think if I was doing this again, I probably would have done it with a slightly larger gathering stitch but you know, there are ways of getting around that, at least for the purposes of this video. Okay, so you know, it's pretty close. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from here, from the center, and I'm going to start working my way to the back. I think probably the most important thing here is to make sure that there's no sort of like, see, there's a little bit of extra here, hanging here. So what I'm going to do, and that's not really ideal, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I pull up my gathers, and I'm going to take a tiny little, maybe not so tiny, I'm going to take a tuck at the center. I just want to make sure that I'm, again, pulling this up as tight as I possibly can. And then I'm going to take a little tuck here. Okay, so I'm just basically pulling in that extra bit of fabric at the end, or the extra bit of gathers at the end here. You're going to want to pin this pretty well, because when you sew it, you're going to want to make sure it doesn't shift or move, because you want to sew it exactly on below or on that stitching line that you used for the gathers. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Find my back edges. And then I've got a little bit the same, not a challenge, but just the same situation on this side, where if I had used a larger gathering stitch, it would have pulled all of this in without an issue. So I think this was like a 3.5. As I said, maybe make a 4 or 4.5. Because you might have a little bit of extra here like I do. There we go. You know, and if this happens and you don't want that little tuck, the great thing about gathering stitches is they're very loose, so you can pull them out. Let's just get this here. There we go. Just make sure that I'm doing that same thing on the other side. Let's see. Yep. very similar. Make sure that we're aligning those raw edges first. Let me just think for a second. Yeah, I mean, I think that, I keep saying it over and over again, larger gathering stitch. I think that that is the solution to this issue. But you could also turn in this again. So for example, let's just say you've got this as tight as possible. You could also turn it in again. I don't really like that because I like to have this opening a line with the opening of the bodice of the skirt. I don't really like to have to bring something in, so I'm not going to do that in this case. But I'm just going to show you. Okay, and let's just make sure that's pinned down. Now, if you don't like this method, because basically how this is going to be finished is you're going to be stitching below your line of gathers. You're going to be trimming that with a pinking shears. You're going to be pressing that towards the bodice, and then you're going to be top stitching it. If you want to do something a slightly different way, you could always bind the bottom of this and cartridge pleat this the way you would a skirt, which I think would be perfectly fine. But it's just, it's a lot more work. This is much, much easier. And in the sample, again, they have top stitched close to this seam just to keep everything in place. In this case, I'm probably just going to press it up, but not top stitch it, because as I said, I'm not a huge fan of the top stitching, but that's fine. And then our last step will be to fit this to your doll. And there are snaps provided here, and snaps make a really wonderful flat closure. If I could just find the snap, make a really nice flat closure so it's not too bulky. If you don't want to do that, you could always do 2 little small buttons that you'll have to provide yourself and thread loops. So, you have a couple of different ways of closing this if you want. I would not use hooks and eyes because they are a little bit too bulky back here. So I'm going to finish this up and then we'll try it on your doll, obviously, or my doll, to fit it and to determine the back closures, and I will show it to you when it's finished. So here she is in her full slip. Of course, let me try to get this a little farther out so you can see more. It's really just the perfect length, as you can see. Just clearing the tops of her feet, but in the back, she's got this wonderful sweep of skirt that will support her very full skirts. And I did do a thread loop and button closure on the back, but again, the kit will come with snaps, which will be a really beautiful finishing, very flat finish. There's more than enough overlap for you to do even buttonholes if you wanted. That would have been completely appropriate at this time period. But it's really just, isn't it such a charming undergarment? And it's just wonderful because she doesn't need the bulk of a chemise with a petticoat over it, which will add more to the waist, etc. So this is our underpinnings, the pantallettes, the full slip, and now she will be able to have the correct silhouette for the mid-1860s for her dresses. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Oh, one other thing is, if you want to give this a little bit more body, and I'm not sure if I mentioned it in an earlier segment, is you might want to spray starch it after it's done. Don't spray starch it and then gather it, because it might make the gathering a little bit more onerous. But if you spray starch it, you're going to get a beautiful crispness and a fullness to the back of the skirt. So enjoy.
Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button.